in the world, in democracy, and for Canada.
Yeah.
How would we design together? Like, how do we truly co-create where we're going, and what is the vision for Canada?
What do we want our society to be and to look like?
So many folds and mountains and valleys and troughs.
What's up? It's Paul from Seoul, on the trail with Dan.
Hey.
Where are we, Dan? Dan Walker.
Oh yeah, we're up on St. Mark's summit, so on Cypress Mountain, on Coast Salish territory actually.
Coast Salish territory.
Yeah, we are.
All right, more on that later. So now we've got to do a GoPro clap.
Do I need to do it?
I'm trying to do the GoPro clap. So.
I don't even know what that means.
Thanks for coming with me on this walk, Dan.
This is great. This is our day to spend a day.
Yeah,
It's
not
awesome.
a bad Friday morning. You are Dan Walker.
I am. That's
and
great.
you're the founder of Collective Imagination.
That's true. Yeah. It's a new one I'm getting used to. Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Tell us about Collective
What is
Imagination.
it? Yeah.
What is it?
So I think the name really reflects that belief in the brilliance that we each have. So I think within each person we have these wonderful expressions of what the world should look like. Collective imagination is this expression of like, how do we dream that dream together? Like, how do we come together as a society to really co-create the systems in which we live? So for me, I don't know, I've always had that questions around justice and what is justice and how do we build a just society. And what I've come to learn over time is really justice is that which appears when we truly co-create the systems we live in. So that's the central thing that I've been trying to work on for years and done in different organizations and different boards and pieces. And over time I was like, well, if I believe this to be true, why don't I try and pursue that with organizations that feel the same thing? So Collective Imagination is the consulting practice that I now run, really supporting organizations in that work to embed what some would term social impact, social purpose within their organizations to really start to co-create systems that are more just and more joyful.
Do you remember like a first time establishing a connection to nature? What was the earliest experience that would have led to you down the years being here on Friday morning in a misty forest?
I'd probably go back to my grandparents. Like, my grandparents were huge advocates for time outside. So even like as we walk today, it's like a dank day in the forest and there's mushrooms everywhere. And I don't know, we'd go into the forests back home. Definitely not as large as this, but and we'd pick mushrooms and then put them on the table, scribble and draw them. And I think just that, awareness of what's around us is probably what I got from them. They still love those spaces. They move at a slower pace now, definitely, but still get outside and love being, I don't know, humbled by the forest above them.
Yeah.
So I started back in the day, like I think justice has always been a question for me. So I answered it, I would say naively when I was young. Studied law at university, I was doing well at school, got kind of pushed into that path. I ended up moving to London and working for the Crown Prosecution Service, the legal prosecutor in the UK, and working in a London Crown Court. And it gave me such a good exposure to what the justice system is and did. And as time passed, I realised that wasn't the expression of justice I believed to be true. The system wasn't addressing the underlying inequities that society holds. It was just administering punishment. So I'll always say I entered that work with a belief in justice and I left it because of the same belief. Kind of coming from there, I ended up moving to Canada. This, has always meant a lot to me, these spaces and being outside amongst nature. So I started looking at roles in the outdoor space, got a role supporting MEC CEO and doing some of the work there. They were doing amazing things at the time when the co-op was really running and pushing around people and planet. It's the first time in a business and I was like, wow, this is what business can and does look like. Really appreciative for that experience. And then left there, joined Arc'teryx, did the same thing for our CEO at the time. And one of the things that came to me every year, we do a sample sale. So we produce gear that we test out to build the final product. That gear couldn't be sold commercially. So instead we sold it internally at like heavily reduced rates. And as part of that, it generated probably about $100,000 a year. So I started asking questions. I was like, well, what are we doing with that money? Like, where is it going? What are we trying to achieve with it? Like, what are we trying to do with it in terms of community, and how are we thinking about that? So started hosting conversations with the company internally and saying, what are our values? Why do we exist? And then what is the societal need that intersects with it? Bringing in community leaders as well from grassroots organisations to try and understand better where we could focus. And if you look at many of the outdoor brands, it's kind of similar. You've got, why do they create the products they do? At the root, no, there's really this belief in the power of connection to the land. Like, that's really at the heart of, if you look at any of the outdoor brands, why they build into those spaces and why they build the product they do. It's like, yeah, they believe there's a lighter, more comfortable way to do it, but in service of what? And it's in service of, I don't know, this and what you feel when you're in these spaces. So we did that, and we essentially asked that question, and for when you look at connection to the land, what are the issues that intersect with it? Well, this is Indigenous land. The outdoor industry has a very extractive relationship with these spaces. It doesn't acknowledge sacred spaces. The language it uses celebrates wilderness and first ascension. It denies the presence of Indigenous peoples. How do we shift that, and how do we rethink that and actually do the work of truth and reconciliation? So that was a foundation of my work. And from that, it's kind of led me down this path of understanding the importance of centering community expertise to then truly co-create the systems in which we live. So Arc'teryx, or any of the brands that are doing this work in the various movements they support, they're not leading it, and nor should they be. Instead, it's the community leaders in these grassroots organisations that are. And the work of businesses and organisations is to listen to those needs and map strategy and resources in service of it.
This is a very serious question that we've been grappling with at work quite a bit. Okay. Would you rather fight one duck that's the size of a horse, or 100 horses that are duck-sized?
What if I'm a pacifist and I'm like,
No, you have to fight.
I have to fight.
You're going to war. You're being attacked. You're under attack. You're under attack.
I think the massive. Oh, this is hard.
Yeah.
This is really hard.
And just by the way, I do think that there is a right answer and a wrong answer to this question.
This makes it even harder.
And so your work at the moment, at least, or in general, focuses specifically on equitable access to outdoors?
It's interesting. So I would say, like, right now, because of the connections that I have, like, I've moved in the industry for a long time. So in the outdoor space, I know a lot of people from all the different brands. I've sat on different boards in that space. So the organic connections are there. But I'm agnostic of sector. Like, we need it everywhere. We need it in the spaces of access to justice within criminal justice. We need it within healthcare and education. So that for me is what I'm trying to build right now, is how do I expand beyond just outdoor industry.
And so social justice in particular rather than environmental, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're interwoven and they're braided together, but I would say I come from the people centrally. That for me, like, they're driven by social is the space. Like, even on the environmental, it is the people who ultimately care about the land that then results in the protection. So I think for me, it always starts with the importance of centering humans in this shared experience, of belonging. Like, how do we actually move to this space of true belonging in the world? And I say it too, like, towards a just and joyful society is the piece that I'm pushing towards. And I always say justice is not, for me, the aspiration. Like, I think that's a foundation. Like, if we live in a just society, great, but it's devoid of any joy. And I think that's the space for me of how do we get that foundation of justice in place for all people, such that we can then expand into this space of joy. And, like, we see the expression and who you are, who other people are, how they challenge, stretch our thinking, inspire us in different ways. And that to me is it comes from the people. Like, that everything is, it's relationships, it's chatting through, processing this life together, I guess. I care about the environment deeply, but I come from the human the human perspective, I guess.
Co-creating pathways towards a more just and joyful society. Yeah, I like that you've expressed it in that way of it's working towards a more. It's not like let's achieve a just and joyful society, you know.
Achieve now. Yeah, no, it's
achieve
not.
like, justice now. It's like no, hang on, let's work towards it together.
Yep. Yeah.
And I'm interested in how that same perspective applies to organizations and how those dynamics apply to an organization
That's good.
as opposed to on
Yeah,
an individual level.
I mean, it all starts with the individual. Like, I think, yes, organizations have their own force, pull, requirements, direction set from the economies within which we live and the systems within which we live. But really, at the heart, organizations are just collections of individuals. And I think that's the piece. It is really the individuals that set the direction of those things. And ultimately, like, those systems in which we live, whether it's for a business and it's the shareholders that they have or the board and those pieces, they're also individuals. And I think it's that, what are the requirements we're setting as individuals? How are we showing up? How are we thinking about collective belonging? How are we working to dissolve our own ego and not needing to be the center of everything? And it needs to be mine and I'm right and I need to make sure I've got my stuff and I'm supported. And instead working in this space of abundance of, like, you matter as much as I do, and everybody matters as much as we all count one in many ways of, like, all our opinions matter. And when we start to move into that space, I think then we get into the real redesign of a world in a much more, I don't know, joyful expression, just expression. But yeah, it starts with the individual work for me. I think the big piece that I see time and again is the ego, the self-centering that drives us in directions that aren't collaborative, that aren't collective, that don't support the collective good. So that's where I would always say the work should start. I think on the organizational piece, it's then how do we express that and create space for true conversation, true working across difference, true navigating, true co-creation. Whose voices are we not including? Whose voices should we be including? How do we redesign the way we structure our meetings, the way we structure conversations, the way we process information, such that we're creating towards this greater sense of belonging? So I think it's both. Like, it's a complex process, and it's also really simple. I think you can start by asking that question of, in any conversation, who am I centering? You start to look at it, and once I've started to do that myself, and you're like, oh yeah, that's in service of me, that's in service of me, that's in service of me, and starting to rethink that and be like, what's in service of us? And how, I think if you start to look at it through that lens, instantly you can't see it.
I think especially moving here, so like coming from London, and when I'd say that to people, and they'd be like, where are you from? It's amazing where you're from. You've got such rich history where you come from, and we don't have that here. And I'm like, that it's not true. Like, there's a phenomenal history of Indigenous peoples on the land, and it's just that it's not acknowledged. And even in the citizenship test, there is such minimal amount, and I'm like,
such a minimal amount.
That is it. To me, it's like, if I'm coming here, that should be the foundation of my,
I
don't know, my understanding of this place.
Of the space.
And if you can't if that's not in there, do I really understand where I'm from?
Exactly.
So, and it feels like such a missed
opportunity.
to have that conversation with people coming in, to say, actually, this is the land, and this is where it's connected, as opposed to, it starts with colonial history, and is that really the...
Which it was, of course, an important piece of the puzzle to understand. But it's not the starting point.
No, it's really not. It's not. It's not the only point in it. So, I don't know. That would be. That I'd love to see more as well. In that. We've got work to do. We definitely got work to do.
For sure.
I moved to Canada. I became, like, really jarred by the fact that we don't acknowledge the indigeneity of the land and the Indigenous peoples in Canada, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the amazing work that came out through that. And I just became like, I need to learn more. So I did so much reading on these different spaces. And you get to this point of, as you rise in your understanding, and you realize the harm that exists within that work. And the harm that's been done to Indigenous people, the cultural genocide that's taken place, the harms that continue to take place, the exclusion from conversations, and different pieces like that. So as you realize that, you're like, okay, and there's an obligation on me as a citizen to move past that and into relationship. And that's where I see the biggest disconnect, and it was for me, of I'd academically understood it. I'd watched the right videos. I'd listened to the right podcast. I'd read the right books. I was like, I was in. I'd done the work, as like what a lot of people would describe. And now I would say I hadn't done any of the work. Like it's actually until you start to actually get into a relationship.
Yes.
And be like, oh, I see you. How do we work through and build relationship? And that's the bit for me where we need to spend more time, is in true relationship with one another and like seeing each other. And the same for businesses too. It's how do you make those environments truly welcoming for all people to come in? How are you intentionally making sure we do have a diverse workforce and team? And how are we questioning whose voices are not in those conversations? You need to do the reading unquestionably. You need to think about who you're centering in the conversation. Is it you? Is it us? You then need to build relationship and be like, I see you, I want to understand the experience, and how do we work together? And as a business, how do you then truly co-create and say whose voices are not here, whose voices should be here that are not, and how do we build true relationships for the long term so that we are designing into this more, we're designing systems together rather than those empowered designing systems that are then imposed on people who are excluded from those conversations, and not using those relationships in service of your power and reinforcing that, but truly, what do you think, like, and how do we do this together, and that's what I click up when I say, in the world, in democracy, and for Canada, how would we design together? Like, how do we truly co-create where we're going, and what is the vision for Canada?
What do we want our society to be and to look like? And
totally. It matters what you think. It matters what everybody on this trail we've seen thinks. It matters what everybody in Vancouver, like all of those spaces. And like, how do we stitch that together, but see each other and truly care about that? And I think that's what I hope we're building towards more, I guess.
Yeah. I think that's the bit for me. I still think we don't have a vision for Canada. Every organisation has a vision.
Yeah.
Like, what is Canada's vision? I have no idea what we would say that is, and that to me, I don't know, that feels like a massive miss.
Yeah.
So can you talk about specific projects that you've been involved in? What are you actually doing?
This is great. So I mean, there's some good stuff. Like Burn Snowboards is one of the first clients that I have, and they're doing very intentional work. Ashley Laporte there is a great friend and heads up their purpose work, and we've known for a long time, so know the way we move. And again, it's really in their programming and in their work around partnership and philanthropy, and how do you truly start to center community expertise? Like, how do you truly think about that in different ways? Whose voices are we including? Whose voices are we centering? How are we designing programs in service of it? And you're really seeing that expression in the work that they're doing with such intentionality, to think about the power they hold and what is their role in these various movements that they're seeking to support around climate and equitable access in those spaces. There's another group, the Outdoor Diversity Alliance. It's a non-profit that I helped to get going last year. And they really sit at the heart of the outdoor industry, and they bring in all the different brands. So you've got Keen, Cotopaxi, REI, Protect Our Winters, and different brands members of it. And what we've been talking about, we hosted a gathering and really asked the member companies, like, what are the challenges and what are the barriers in this work, in embedding commitments to equity within the outdoor industry, so in participation in hiking and different things, but also in participation in employment too. And the one thing that came up time and again was, we sat in these roles in the different organizations, kind of know the pathways we'd take, how we'd center community, how we'd do that work together. The major barrier is that it's not being prioritized by the senior leaders within the organization. So what we're trying to work on right now is a business case for equity in the outdoors. So really saying, you've seen it in the environmental space. So many businesses are seeing environmental commitments, consumers are demanding it, it's non-negotiable that we think about carbon targets, but also it's a building block of growth. Like, if we have a circular model of business, that can be a driver of revenue. If we have repairability, that can be a driver of revenue. So the business case for it has made sense. So you've seen a big investment on the environmental side. We've not seen that on the social side. So that's the thing we're trying to pull together right now. And as you look at the macro trends, they're there and the data's there, and you see demographic shifts taking place. Time and again, the value of having a truly diverse team that has a sense of belonging and works together on these problems. The experience you bring from your background compared to mine, we've lived in different worlds, and you bring them together, and we've got different expressions of ideas, and all of a sudden you stretch and you're like, oh, we think about things together in different ways. And repeatedly that's shown in studies that the benefits to business from truly embracing diversity and the fullness of what that can mean. I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes, and I'm curious when we get it launched, is that the thing that can start to unlock a little bit more investment prioritization from businesses, or is it not? And that then we'll process from there. But it's been a great project with phenomenal people working on it, and we'll see. It's a good test.
The Olympics are in the past,
Yes, yeah.
right? But they were the big thing
Yeah.
of 2024.
Yeah.
If you had to compete
Oh, this is good.
in one Olympic event,
Yeah.
what would it be?
The one that I would like to, but I would never be
Yeah.
the one. The 100 meters.
Okay,
Like,
sure.
100%. Like the
Nice.
attention
Yeah,
on that is
it's the
just-
coolest. It's the coolest of all of
Oh.
the sports, definitely.
And to stand amongst all the,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
the bravado, the
Yeah.
ego, and
Yeah.
step aside. And
Yeah.
I just imagine being on that line, and the energy is just like throbbing.
Yeah.
So that would probably be the one that I would want to be in.
Okay.
You mentioned the hesitation of doing more harm than good, or ending up being part of the problem rather than the solution. Maybe that's a oversimplified way of expressing it, but
The fear of harm is real.
fear of harm.
The fear of harm is real, and it should be. Like, I think there should be an awareness of it, and a respect, and a comfort in those spaces, I would say, to be like, this, there is trauma in this work and people's experience, and it is. We have to have maybe fear is the wrong word, but like be conscientious about it.
Yeah.
There is trauma and challenge there.
Yeah.
But we can't be limited by that.
Yeah.
So it's like that tension of like, yes, be anchored by fear, have an awareness of it,
Yeah.
push beyond it. Otherwise, in my views and my experience, like, that's not the work. If you sit in this fear, you're not actually changing the system that you live in. So I think that's another big one. The speed of change is so hard, and I say this as a person with the privileges that I have. Like, I think that requirement of urgency hits on me in a different way. I have the impacts of climate change are less severe on me than they might be. The impacts of equity and justice are less severe on me than they might be for others. So I think it's hard for me to speak to that at a great depth, because there is a real urgency. We're in a place of challenging times, and people are experiencing it. We saw it during the pandemic in a really profound way. That different people experience that same imposition in a very different way. So I think, I wouldn't speak to that too much myself, but there's an unquestionable urgency. And then on the other side, there's this need for like true trusting relationships. I see you, I acknowledge your experience, I understand the truth of that experience. And how do we move forward together? How do we actually build long-term trusting relationships? It hit me a few years ago too, like I was really struggling with that tension. The closer we get to community and understanding community need, what we then see is the distance that we are is even further than we realize. And we're like, that's a hard tension to hold in a role, to be like, I'm working with community, I'm trying to center what the needs and the thinking and understanding, and get
the more you understand, the more you realize how much
and then I'm trying to navigate
how much more there is to do.
I think that's the real tension in it, and holding that. But to that point, like, I was over on the island a few years ago, and I was totally burning. Like, I was totally like holding those two things and being like, this is a mess, this is not where I need to be. And I was chatting to an elder, and she kind of just stood with me in a patient tone, just was like, this land that you're standing on has been under negotiation since 1963. Wow. We may sign the agreement this year.
Wow.
And she's like, just have patience.
Yeah.
And it's
yeah.
we need that, and it's hard because it's like, And then how do you center the fact that we have made progress? I look at the last 5-10 years, we've come miles from where we were,
Yeah.
and yet we've still got miles to go. And both of those things are true. Like we've
Yeah.
traveled a long distance, and there's still a long distance to run.
Yeah.
It's the key, and especially in this work and these roles, you're no good to any of the movements if you leave them. Like a great mentor once said that. So
Yeah.
how do you make
Yeah.
sure that you're also finding wellness within what you're doing,
Yeah.
and you're pushing, and you're finding
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all, yeah. I don't love the phrase progress over perfection in some ways. I think I've seen it used as almost a cop-out to like
Yes.
fall short and just be like, oh, it's just
Yeah.
progress.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do think there's a sentiment in it of that true, take a step, take a step, just
Yeah.
keep taking a step. And it's like,
Yeah.
move to action. I always say that too, of like, values don't live in the abstract, they become true with meaningful actions that build one atop the other. Like, you can say words all you want. I can tell you
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
sustainable, I care about the environment, I
Yeah.
care about people.
Yeah.
Means nothing. Like, I
Yeah.
can easily just throw those words out there
Yeah.
until you see the way I move in the world, and then you're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, you're true. Or
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
that's,
yeah. Oh, you do actually.
yeah, that's the integrity that comes, I guess.
Yeah.
I feel like the maneuverability of a big duck is tricky for it to maneuver.
Okay.
So I feel like I could move around it quite easily.
Yeah.
Yet that is terrifying, the size
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
Whereas the little horses, I feel like I just walk, but that mass-wise, 100 duck-sized horses is way bigger than the mass that a duck would take up. I'm gonna go the big duck.
The big duck, hey?
Big duck, yeah.
It's funny because 5 weeks ago, I would have told you that the answer is obviously you have to fight the little horses because you just kick them away one by one, and there's nothing more terrifying than a duck the size of a horse.
Yeah.
But I've since changed my mind to one big target, an adversary that you can focus on,
Yeah.
rather than the overwhelming number. I think we underestimate how many 100 actually is.
That is a lot of horses.
It's a lot of little horses.
I'll stick with my answer.
Yeah, okay, well, there we go. That's settled.
This is also a thing. Super cool. Oh yeah. Wow.
Ooh, yeah.
The mist. I love the
Yeah.
slow movement.
There we are, the top of St. Mark's Summit.
You did the thing.
Did the thing.